The world was created to hold a lot of stories. I mean, that was the reason we created it to begin with, was we wanted to create a world, a planet, with it could hold basically as many stories as we wanted. When we looked at the time that we hadn't told, it was we really hadn't focused much on E-Day and sort of it being before the story before the story, and it seemed like a logical place to go. To go back to the days of just after E-Day where the Locusts were new, you had that fear of them again. We've played with lethality, we've played with damage, we've played with health and a lot of things, so that when you see a wretch now, like when you're playing on hardcore and a wretch comes bounding at you, you're nervous, you're scared because 2 swipes and you're down. The context for the story and the gameplay is this trial. Basically, the game starts with Kilo Squad being arrested and brought before Colonel Loomis to go under trial for basically going rogue through this mission. We allow you to play the testimony that's being given in their defense. So sort of you play the flashbacks while the court scene is in real time. As you play through that, you actually have the opportunity to change the testimony by taking different choices and taking on new challenges in the level. So it's kind of what we call declassification, where there'll be classified information like, did you know that dark wretches showed up in this mission? Usually that's classified, that wasn't on the record, but you can declassify that, and now not only have you changed the testimony, but you actually get different gameplay because now you're fighting dark wretches where you wouldn't be normally. Judgment's role in sort of the franchise is that it serves a couple of purposes. One is that it allows us to give more Gears content before the dark period of the console transition, you know, when there's going to be this lull of content where we're sort of focused on what's next. And we didn't want to go too long without having something for Gears fans to be able to play. So Judgment serves that. But it also is an opportunity for us, because the fact that it's outside of the trilogy, that we not only can play with it and experiment and try new things. And so when you go and play, you realize we've remapped controls, the way that we tell stories are different, the way that you play the game is different. What's really interesting is even with all those changes, it actually feels a little bit more like Gears 1. It has that sort of essence of Gears combat to it, that it feels like the combat bowls and the straightforwardness of it and the intensity and the visceralness of it harkens back to Gears 1 more, yet it's a lot of changes to kind of the formula. People Can Fly has been a part of Epic for over 5 years now. They joined us in 2007. What we wanted to do is find this sort of way of bringing sort of the old guard of the Gears team from Epic and then the new ideas and the exciting ability to experiment and kind of break the mold that PCF could supply. And so bringing those sort of 2 teams together to make Judgment has been a perfect sort of mix on how we think about that sort of, okay, we're making sure it's true to Gears, but also we're bringing a lot of new ideas and they're bringing a lot of new influences in, like how we tell a story differently, how do we change the gameplay and those sorts of things. You know, whenever you grow a franchise, there's a certain level of what we call betrayal. That if you don't betray the customer a little bit, then it's not changing enough, and people feel like it's stagnant or it's not moving. And so but if you betray them too much, then you lose them. So you always have to keep it fresh. And I think by being on the outside of the Marcus story and being separate, I think we're going to have a lot more opportunity for that to show new things. But there's a lot of things that it's still very much Gears. But now we have things like the accessibility of changing the control scheme. So people who play first-person shooters, they know that Y is switch weapons, and so having the notion of an offhand grenade, these things are actually different for Gears, but very familiar to people who play other games. And so even though it's a change, it's actually a change that I think is probably more mainstream than it is to be just different to be different. Everybody in the industry talks about replayability, but the reality is when you sit and you play like Gears of War 3, if you play for a 12-hour experience, it takes a lot for you to say, and now let's do it again, right? Like, I'm gonna go do another 12 hours, you know? Whereas when you're in the moment and you're fighting, that idea of, I just finished that was awesome, but I wanna do better, or I wanna change something out, I wanna declassify something this time, or I wanna try a different strategy, that idea of instant replayability, the things you see in iOS games and the sort of the more smaller consumption where you consume it in smaller bites, that's something we really wanted to have in Judgment as well, so that you could have that sort of, because one of the things that, again, as Cliff says, is that when you design for replayability, even if it isn't replayed, it's still a better game because of that design. We kind of, when we look at one-offs versus trilogies, it's the idea of we never assume success. It's the same thing with the Gears 1, 2, and 3. It was never built as, here's our trilogy, now let's begin step 1. It was always like, let's make the biggest, best game we can. And like, wow, okay, that was really successful. Let's plan number 2. And we continue that chain. And actually a little bit to our, I wish we had done more trilogy arc plannings. I think it could have been even a better experience than what we delivered. So in terms of Judgment, I mean, we're kind of going the same way. It's this idea of you need to look forward and prepare for success, but you also need to not assume success. And so I think right now we're just going to see how the fan response to Judgment is. We've got, like I said, a lot of changes. It's a new character as the lead and new gameplay and new controls, so we just need to see how that plays out.